if we're going to get better, we got to stop thinking everything is going to be easy.
Hey everybody, this is Todd Dills back with another edition of Overdrive Radio, where today we're going to pick up where longtime Overdrive contributor, former OTR owner, and current business coach Gary Buchs left off on the Overdrive Extra blog last week. There, as regular readers will know, he penned and published notes on the fine art of rates negotiation, with a special emphasis on ways to counterbalance the pressure so many owner-operators feel to move fast on load opportunities, given the speed at which loads come and go on the boards in particular.
Information's moving so much faster. The speed of information interferes often with, solid negotiation. When you speed up that, it gets missed. Things get missed.
Move too fast to accept an offer, and you might neglect to consider fully that the good-looking long-haul run to the West Coast starts out due well east of Atlanta, with a load appointment for 2 in the afternoon. If you didn't effectively build into your rate the added cost of traffic in Atlanta rush hour, or the time to wait it out, for instance, you're behind the 8 ball before you even started. Gary Buchs offered a different example of one among many details he's seen people miss if they don't take the time to effectively negotiate.
I read repeatedly on the social media post, got to a shipper and they wanted, an example was they wanted cash for the lumper and they didn't have cash. I'm just thinking to myself, how does that get missed if you do a lot of reefer work? And, and I'm not trying to belittle the person who put it down, but try to share some ideas on, well, how do you avoid that the next time? What lessons do we learn when things don't go quite right? And how do we apply the lessons we learn? Things like, when we overcommit or anticipate travel times, drive times. You look at the data that the American Transportation Research has put out about delays, the traffic and time lost in traffic. And if you're an owner, I think there's a couple of areas where studying that to think about what times are you going to travel through certain areas, and if you have to go through. Drivers and owner-operators, they feel the pressure of time squeezing them so much, and that interferes with our ability to tap that brake pedal, pause just even a moment. So we have to use our experience.
As Buchs mentioned in his story, too, on Overdrive Extra, use a quote-unquote strategy of pre-negotiation. If time pressure is such that you feel you only have that one chance to just accept a deal, there's no better time than before the call is placed to use that pre-negotiation, as he put it in the story. You can find a link to that in the show notes for this Overdrive Radio edition, where he elaborates. What he's talking about there, of course, is advanced planning prior to making a call about any load. Get a feel for the average pricing for any given lane and whether that comes close to your own necessary rate. Consider loads days, weeks, even months in advance. Generally, build more time in between an immediate need and starting your negotiation. Today on the podcast, much more in the way of specific ideas built on Buchs' wealth of personal experience in business with owners operating in the freight world today. With these ideas, though as he noted up top, none of this is particularly easy in the execution, hopefully more can avoid participating in what might otherwise feel like an auction where the winner's curse is almost always to be paying more than an object is really worth, research has shown. In the freight world, that's the opposite. Win the load after race to the bottom, ping-ponging with the competition, and you'll certainly be getting compensated well below the market value for the freight movement. Keep tuned for more after the break.
If you're in an area that's going to get a dose of winter, you need to protect your diesel with Howe's Diesel Treat starting today. When used at every fill-up, Diesel Treat is guaranteed to prevent gelling, remove water, and add lubricity, making sure your truck or tractor is ready to go and performing its best. And if you face crazy cold temps, make sure you have a safety net. Howe's Diesel Lifeline. Keep it on hand for gelling or icing emergencies. It's a lifesaver that's sure to get you up and running in 15 minutes or less.
Find more information about the full line of Howe's fuel treatments at HOWES, HowesProducts.com. Here's Gary Buchs, who starts with some background on just what got him thinking about the topic of negotiation. He's a guest on Road Dog Trucking Live on SiriusXM with host Casey Phillips most Thursdays. And it was one of those shows last fall that in some ways kickstarted his focus back to the ever-present need for skilled negotiation in business.
I do the show with KC, and it's a great opportunity to just share and take calls and just help people air out. But I have come to realize it's best if I propose a topic, and if we agree on that that's timely and could help, an audience, we're always open to anything. And I had proposed a few months, I think it was like October, I think possibly was the month. And I said, and what brought me to think of that was, as the end of the year approaches, people begin to behave differently. The way they look at loads with the holidays, the way they're looking at the weather, the way they are rationalizing their work days, they're looking at the way they spend money. Are they trying to spend money to, get a tax deduction? So spending wisely through negotiations. And then I also brought up how, and this is something I'd like to encourage owner-operators to think about, is what is going to be the load opportunities in the first quarter. It's hard to think how it's going to change often. We're looking so much at today and tomorrow. We're not thinking about the fact that they're going to need construction materials for these disaster areas, for example. They're going to need plants and fertilizer and supplies at home improvement centers come springtime. That is a really big thing, for example. The needs for moving different food, products. If we look at, for example, the reefer, hauler, the segment of reefer and food haulers, people that move food products. I get a report from the USDA that shows the amount of the rates and the number of loads and so on and so forth for transportation of reefer loads. And I watch how that moves to the different regions. And like right now, there's a lot of product coming out of Mexico because we're in the middle of winter, for example. Right. And what's coming out of Florida and the southern parts of Texas, what's coming out of, maybe Southern California or so on, where we have irrigation and warmer weather. So thinking ahead and beginning to negotiate to get a hold of the customers and begin to say, hey, what are we looking at for February? What are we looking at for March? What are we looking at, whatever commodity you work with, what are we going to be looking at in, say, 6 weeks, 8 weeks, 4 weeks, whatever number you want to use, and get yourself in that list and do what I call beat the broker board. It's not beat the broker up, but every broker agent I have ever had good relationships with told me they love when they do not have to post the load publicly. If they can book with a trusted owner, their best customers, their best loads, develop that relationship. It saves them from taking, possibly hundreds of phone calls or emails and saying, no, it's gone, no, it's not. And then having to vet out, carriers and so on. It may sound unfair to the new carrier and so on, but the fact is, everyone is an individual and a competitor, and competition makes us stronger, and we have to all learn to be better at what we do. Making that call, making that sales call, like I said, make an appointment and go see these people. If you can't see them in person, do that Zoom video. That visually there is something happens when we can look someone in the eye. I do believe that. It's not easy, and it takes time. What I learned, and it took me a number of years to learn a lot of these things. It's a never-ending process, but I made my profit through the management, not the driving. I made it through the work I did ahead of time, the work I did making the phone call or the email or researching. I did, and I suggested to people I coach, for example, you may need to look for the second load before you book the first load. Find the load you want and then figure out how to go get it may be the best option or a better option. And that way you don't get caught with getting into an area where you give away any or all profit trying to get back out. Like the TV commercial about insurance. If you can bundle loads, if you can stack, customer service requirements together, that's going to help you really improve efficiency and improve time management.
So, a lot of that could fall under the notion of quote unquote pre-negotiation. Like, negotiation is not we don't necessarily want to think about negotiation as just the phone conversation, right? It's there's a lot of prep that just goes into a good outcome. A lot of work and planning.
When you talk with a lot of owners and listen closely, you also find out the personal bias against things or for things, how much that influences. Like, you don't want to get into a automatic, I won't do something. If you begin to limit without getting the details, and I can give you examples of where people, I did a lot of work in Chicago, for example, and people just automatically, well, I won't go there. It's too dangerous. It's, too much traffic. What they were thinking was they're going to get $2 a mile to go into Chicago instead of the $10 a mile I got. Right. And you price accordingly, and you get the details. Now, were there a lot of risk? Yes, there were, but you price that in, and you have to be prepared to understand it. A simpler way maybe to think about some of this time, and this is how I came to help the evolution of my pricing. I took, for example, the average rate I was running my loads for. Let's say I, was averaging $2.30 a mile, and my average run was 400 miles. Well, if I found a load for 200 miles, I would say, okay, I need to double that rate per mile. It's fewer miles, but I'll double the rate. So instead of, 230, it's going to be 460 would be my minimum for 200 miles, and so on and so forth. And that was a very simple beginning to how I changed how I started evaluating loads and the value of loads. And so if an owner that listens to this, if they take their average rate, like I say, whatever that is, and they take that average rate and then figure out the ratio of miles. So if they average, like I say, if you average 400 miles a day at $2 a mile, you see a load at 200 miles, then you need to be looking at that like $4 a mile, and so on.
Yeah, because it's going to eat up. It's going to eat up most of a day. Any load that is under that whatever your average length is, right? Yeah.
The other thing is, don't ever say never. Like a lot of people would say, well, I won't do a multiple stop load. And I think part of that is because their experience has been when they make a delivery, it takes them 8 hours to make a delivery. When you haul a multiple stop load, generally, it's closer to a final mile delivery, closer to the final customer. They want that product more than a big box warehouse. And I would average about 20 minutes of delivery, and I might have 10 stops on a trailer. It's not really an LTL, it's a multiple stop, like cabinetry or tires, or it could be anything. But you would go in and then be prepared to help unload, and that really pays you a lot better than driving, actually, oftentimes. But part of that's in the negotiation too, getting in stop pay, assist pay. If you're flat or platform work, getting, tarp pay, negotiating for that, because your tarps aren't free. If you damage a tarp, think about the cost, the risk. Every driver that I know that has gotten hurt real bad has been from flatbed work where they fell off or something fell on them. You have to really price that risk in, and it will vary over time and the locations and the commodity and so on. It makes it more complicated. There isn't one single answer, unfortunately. It's developing those communication skills.
Absolutely paramount when you do make those calls about particular loads to a broker.
When you contact them, try this. When they answer, you have a load in mind. Ask them, is such and such load available? If the answer is yes, very politely and simply ask, would you please tell me everything you can about this contract, this load? And then don't ask anything else or give any more answers until they answer the question. And if they are confident in the customer and the load and they know the details, they will rattle off the basic details. Yeah, we pick up this every Tuesday. It's this. It's first come, first serve, or it's appointment. You need 5 straps to secure the load, and so on and so forth. You can have a lot of confidence in that information when they give you detail. Now, I had one time. It was kind of comical to think about. I asked the question, "What will you tell me everything about the load?" And I'll quote. It was very simple. He said, "It pays $500 and it weighs 45,000 pounds. What else would you need to know?" I'm like, and you went like 120 miles or something. And that's all he said he knew. And I just politely said, "You told me everything I need to know, and it tells me that's not the right load for me." Now, when you ask that question, you don't want to give them what you want to know. You don't want to say, well, is it appointment or first come? Let them answer, because they're going to give you the answer you want to hear often. You don't want to lead them to what you want. You want them to give you what they know. That doesn't mean if it's not perfect, you don't have a response. You don't necessarily cut them off and say, "No, I'm not interested," or "I'll never take that load." You never say that. Simply say to them, if something changes or you get something different, please contact me. But the way it is right now, the load, the way it's what you've described, it just can't work. I can't give the best service possible right now for that load. And then if they say, well, what would make it work? Then you go from there and you discuss, well, I need a little more flexibility on the load time, or
I need to know what, or I need to know what the load is in the case that you mentioned, right? Well,
yeah.
I need to know if I can actually fit this thing in my trailer.
I need to know how it's packaged. I need to know, is there a chance it's got hazardous materials? Can I call the customer? And that's another thing. Never be afraid to contact a customer before you go and move. I had a couple of times in my career where I would call to check on, after I got the contract. It was supposed to be like first come, first serve, and I would call to double check. And a couple of times the shipper would say, "No, you need an appointment." I said, "Well, can I make an appointment?" "No, you can't make the appointment. The broker has to make the appointment." And I would call them back and say, this load can't work. And they're like, "What do you mean?" I said, "You need an appointment and you don't have one, so I'm going to have to give it back to you." "Well, let me make an appointment." I go, "It's already too late because I already know the newest appointment can be like a day and a half out. They've already told me that." And so they didn't do their homework. But you help educate or help them. Don't get mad. Say,
Right.
"Hey, I hope this helps you in the future." Be an asset. Article that we just had published. You are not the remote worker as the owner, operator, the driver. You actually are the center point, and everyone else is remote. You know more than anyone else. So don't be afraid to use that asset, that you're knowledgeable, that you be more than just nothing against drivers, but be more than just a driver. And if you're a company driver and you're hearing or reading this, you can do that with your own company. You can be more than just that driver. You can help your company be better if you pass on information that would help. For example, I would call a customer about arriving for pickup delivery, and they might say, I had an 8 o'clock or a 7 o'clock. And I would ask, is that the best time? And a couple of times I can remember in particular, they would say, if you would get here, could you get here at 5:30 in the morning or 6? We'll get you out before the rush. That would be great. We'd love it. Or they'd say, would you mind waiting until about 10:30 instead of 8 o'clock? Because we can clear out and you'll get in and out of here in an hour because we're going to have so many people at 8 o'clock. And that allowed me to manage my time better. And I could use my split, logs and so on, pre-plan that hours of service, which would make me so much more efficient as well. It took a lot of stress off.
Stuffing the stress envelope for owner-operators in efforts to be that asset, to be proactive in all manner of day-to-day negotiations, fixed costs, and, as Gary notes here, in some cases, inadequate awareness of just what they're costing you per day worked.
But what's putting the pressure on the time are the commitments I think people have made for fixed cost. The truck payments, the credit card that they have put the repair bill on, things like that. Fixed cost create more pressure, but they're often harder to track down in some ways, because what we see is when we're trying to determine our cost, we've got all these puzzle pieces we're trying to fit together. So you've got, for example, a truck payment. If you don't write a check or you don't do the debit out of your own account, often we tend to start ignoring the cost of the payment of the truck. And, we look at fuel because we see the fuel right in front of us. So when we hear people talk about cost, most often I find they talk about fuel.
You're talking about fuel, and then you just you never forget about the fact that you've got other cost payments to make, such as your insurance and stuff. But yeah, it's not top of mind. It's not, people don't have that like per day figure in their head when it comes to their fixed costs that they can just bring to the front of mind when they're evaluating a load or something like that, or having a conversation with somebody about their car.
The owner operator, the truck owner, they actually, not only do they have, in the end, they are the center of the business transaction. They see and know more than everyone, but they also carry the greatest risk. The owner of the truck has the greatest risk of everyone involved because of the physical aspects of the customer service, the damage, the potential for an accident, regulation, compliance, and so on and so forth. That is a very difficult thing to, put a value on. Now, if you haul a very high value load and you have to buy extra insurance, you'll recognize it then
and have it recognized by others. But yeah, it's like there's a fair amount of discounting of the value of all of that risk that goes on in our freight world, right?
There's a lot of evidence through research about how much stress interferes with our ability to make better decisions.
Right.
Recently read some research where people who are under financial stress, it was about farmers. Okay. When farmers, before they get harvest and are able to sell crops, their cash is dwindling down. They're under a lot of pressure. And the research showed when cash is shorter, incomes are short compared to what they owe, they begin making poor decisions about money, less wise or however than when they had, better income. So when we're under stress for income, it causes us to take more unwise risk and, kind of gamble and do things that could really hurt us. And so we have to be careful with that. This is a marathon. This is not a sprint, folks. It's a long process. And when we go into negotiations, for example, list all the loads you hauled in the last 12 months, 24 months, and count how many times you hauled for the same people and start ranking those as far as the value of your customer. And then try to replace the lower valued ones with more higher value ones. That's kind of your own negotiation with yourself. So that could really, help. If you could replace, say you haul 100 loads in a year, 2 every week for 50 weeks, and you could move 10% of those from the lower end to the higher end, how much difference would that make in your business? It'll be more than what maybe the simple math shows in the long run, because you'll begin to relieve stress, you'll begin making better decisions, you'll be able to maintain your equipment better and so on. And doing those things, eliminate the lower end. The other thing, learning how not to haul loads that do not generate some profit. Years and years ago, I read a story about a man, J.B. Hunt, and he said, if I can make $1 on every load, I know I'll never go broke. Now, obviously, the way they look at profit and we look at profit, we need more than $1 for every load. But I kind of got to thinking about it, and that's where I came up with the zero-based budgeting for each load. If every load generates some profit, the odds of me not being profitable are really slim. So, something. Will it always meet my salary goal? It will if I build that into my cost. So,
yep. Yeah, you got to think about it in those terms, and you got to build your pay into it, and you got to meet that. Otherwise, you're not going to be happy with $1 per load.
After you pay yourself your salary that you've predetermined, setting your own salary is a whole nother negotiation
with yourself.
issue.
Yeah.
What do you need for home? We talk about budgets all the time, but unfortunately, we really don't do much budgeting in reality. We do it in our heads. But we've got thousands of tools out here to help our business, and we talk about it. We just have to learn how to apply what will help us best. We can't use them all. We got to pick the 2 or 3 that are going to be most useful, and then as those habits begin to grow. So back to that calculator.
Gary's making reference to Overdrive's Load Profit Analyzer, our fairly simple online calculator introduced late in 2024, and assists to analyze individual and or compare multiple loads. The calculator includes on its front end places to use the knowledge and analysis Gary's talking about to input not cost per mile overall, but variable cost per mile, fixed costs per day worked, and, considering on the cost side of the ledger, the salary per day worked Gary was talking about as well. About the analyzer particularly, he said,
when you first start out with that, it might seem a little awkward, but you can compare loads. Should I haul the load that delivers today, picks up today, delivers tomorrow, or should I take the 2 or 3 day load that grosses more? And you can compare those for the income per day and the profit per day and so on and so forth. And what you'll probably end up doing is you'll use a mixture. You'll end up hauling a shorter load, medium load, a longer load, but you won't fall into automatic, I need a load that goes 1,000 miles, for example. Right. We tend to round numbers off a little too much. Like if you're negotiating and you make a call to a broker, figure out your cost and don't be afraid when they say, well, the load pays 2,000. Maybe what you need to be able to do is know your numbers. Say, what I really need is $2,152.88. That's what we need to cover this load.
Yeah. What rate would you put on the load? Right. Go in with the number of your own. Sure.
Go into it and use a more exact calculation, not just automatically. Why do we round numbers off so much? And miles, they'll say it's 500 miles. And every trucker out here knows it's probably more like 580 miles. It's about 15% difference and so on. But we use round numbers because they're easy. And if we're going to get better, we got to stop thinking everything is going to be easy. We're anxious. We're in a hurry. And that's where keeping yourself booked a load or 2 ahead helps take off that pressure for speed. If you're sitting, the hardest load to book, I found, the hardest load to decide on is when you're sitting at home and you don't have a load. The load that gets you to leave the house, that is the hardest, that is the most difficult load to negotiate or decide on, because we are comfortable where we're sitting. But when you're sitting out in a truck stop away from home, you'll make that decision faster, quicker. Will it always be the best? Will it always be right? Yeah, roll the dice a little bit. But no, we get into, we've been talking loads. That's the thing we do the most. But as we go into this year, the number of people that are going to be looking to get into a truck, to buy a truck or lease a truck, you need to be prepared for that. That's a whole nother ball game, negotiation. Don't buy the color of the truck.
Right.
They can get more money for a purple truck than any other color out there. They can have the same model truck side by side. And I've had salespeople tell me, man, if that white truck was purple, I could get $1,000 more. It's going to do the same job, but it's purple. Who do you turn to bounce things off of? Who's your mirror that bounces things back to you? Who's going to hold you accountable? Is it a spouse? Is it someone who knows the business? Is it just a good friend.
Right.
But we need to have someone that we can, periodically bounce these things off of, talk to them, and, just, because it gets emotional. And when we get emotional, we can get irrational. And when we get irrational, then we'll lie to ourselves, just get what we want. That's something we really have to be careful of. And it's a process of learning, and we're all in a different place. And so I don't want people to think that I'm trying to say it's easy, because it's not. And it takes time. It takes a lot of time. Like a lot of people are changing companies all of a sudden and understanding how much that's going to cost them. But before they change companies, how are they researching the company? Are they just talking to another driver? Are they looking at the safer score to make sure that it's a good, safe company that won't ruin your, CDL because they have equipment issues or other safety compliance issues that could, prevent you from advancing in your own career. So you really have to be careful with that. But one word of advice on independent contractor contracts: think of them like this: you are buying something with that percentage you're paying. What are you buying? What are you paying for? You can have one that pays 80%, but then you have to pay to use the trailer, and you have to pay to repair the tires, and you have to pay for the insurance. Then you might have one that only pays, 70%. And they cover all that. So for 10% of what you haul, they cover all those risks. And if you take the week off or you don't haul a load, you don't pay those fixed costs. So you really have to put pen to paper and the calculator and figure it out. Because there's huge differences in how to figure out fixed costs in these things. And that affects that cost to haul that load that we just talked about. When one person says, well, I can haul that load for $1.50 a mile, the next person says, well, there's no way you can do that. It costs me $2 a mile. You're comparing apples and oranges at the starting line.
Find that story I mentioned up top by Gary Buchs, headlined "The Fine Art of Negotiation," via a link posted in the show notes for this Overdrive Radio edition, or in the post that houses the podcast for February 4th, 2025 at overdriveonline.com/overdrive-radio. And here's an invitation, too. Add your own voice to the mix when it comes to negotiation. What tactics and broader strategies have you developed through the years to better manage the time necessarily spent on effective negotiation? Drop a comment under the overdriveonline.com post, or get in touch with me directly. Todd Dills, that's TODDDILLS @fusible.com. Love to hear from you. Find Overdrive's Load Profit Analyzer at overdriveonline.com/load-analyzer 2. I'll post a link to that also in the show notes. You can find it wherever you're listening. Overdrive Radio is on Spotify and SoundCloud, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube, Overdrive's Facebook page, and any listening platform, really. Leave us a review there if you're enjoying these, and big thanks in advance for that. Big thanks for listening, too. Overdrive Radio is a production of Overdrive, the voice of the American trucker. It's edited and produced by me, Todd Dills, with the acoustic guitar and other support trucker-songwriter Long Haul Paul Marhofer. The theme is The Legend of the Snake Man by Marhofer, featuring the guitar work of Travis, the Snake Man himself, Whammock. Terry Two Socks Richardson on bass, keys by Tishomingo Jim Whitehead, and on drums, Andrew Marshall. The podcast is backed up further by Overdrive's own social media coordinator, Jasmine Campbell, senior editor, Matt Cole, executive editor, Alex Lockey, and video editors, Lawson Rudisell and Andrew Glenn. See you next time.